the books that I was being taught when I was going to my diaconate was the book by Toffler.
Yeah, Future Shock.
And that, it seems to me like these lectures are concerned in time and old and young and where are we in time. See, because I went to Oregon. Now an experience of my own, if you mind listening to it. I went to Oregon and found the biggest yellow rose I could find. And I could stand in front of that rose and look at it. And maybe even pray of the beauty of the rose. But the rose never reached out. You know, like someone with the capacity of having his limbs complete, or no limbs at all, how can we reach out in time? You know, are we old, young, getting back to the book of Future Shock? How can we reach, how do we, the time limit?
Right, yeah, but you see, we can overcome the time limit. You can overcome by going into the past and remembering what you did in Oregon. You can overcome by extending into the future and planning what you're going to eat for lunch. So we are not stuck in either space or time. And in this sense, we participate in the fullness of spirit. That God is the perfect spirit, while we are imperfect spirits. But it's our spirituality which enables us to become at one with the one who is perfect. And since God has reached out to us with the experience of Abraham and company, and then of Jesus, we've got a two-way interaction between the Great Spirit and us, smaller, lesser spirits. So this is the best way to transcend. And the fact that we're each getting older, you know, as every passing minute goes, no big deal, because the spirit is beyond the age. Body maybe get in trouble because we get to be old. Well, no big deal. You know, we're going to recall that model and we'll get the improved version sometime later on. Yeah. Erica?
I was just wondering if you focus in your meditation, your prayer on love and compassion and expanding your heart, and you become closer to God as the perfect love, as well as, you know, He's the perfect one, the perfect everything. And does that mean that you might also receive the gift of the perfect humor, the perfect intelligence? Also, the closer you come to God, He grants more aspects of Himself to you as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You see, they all are together in God. In me, they're fragmented. And as I work at more integrated understanding, then I get closer to God. It's like the novelist Flannery O'Connor pointed out. Everything that rises, have you heard that? Must converge.
Must what?
Converge.
Oh, converge. Oh.
Come to one. If you're climbing a mountain, right, even a measly little mountain like Lake Peak, right, if you start from the ski basin, right, then you're starting from the western side. Right? And if you start from the Pecos side, you're starting from the eastern side. But as long as you keep climbing, two different people from two different points, they are going to arrive at the same point. If they get to the top of Lake Peak, they won't be able both to stand on it at the same time. I'll have to move aside for someone who's coming a little later. but the peak is the same. And see, this is the experience for people who keep thinking about these things. First, we can be very discouraged because there are differences. There are all of these differences, more than we could write, more than we could talk about, more than we could think about. Right? And we could just say, oh man, because all those differences, we're never going to get together, I just give up. Right? And millions of people do that. Hundreds of millions of people do that. Right? You don't have to do that. You can keep ascending. You can notice that since God has reached down, we got some super unnatural help here. And we can make advances that a lot of people just don't honor. Everything's so divided, let's go get drunk. That's where most people are.
You call Lake Peak miserable again, I'm going to leave this room. That's a lovely little peak. You know, might as well get drunk if you're going to preach that. You're wrong, brother. You're wrong on that one. I want you to repent right now on camera. Tell them the truth about Lake Peak Mountain.
Well, the truth is that I didn't call it miserable. I called it measly.
Measly. Okay, in an Everest context, I can accept that. But you made it sound like it wasn't worth doing.
No. It's well worth it. Now that the snow is gone, you can get there.
Which one is Lake Peak?
Well, it doesn't stand out very much.
You can't see it.
But if you look up there and you see Santa Fe Baldwin, it's the one to the right.
It's to the right.
Yeah, to the right.
It's very narrow.
It has a lovely view.
It's narrow.
It's very narrow.
It's like a peak. It's like a cone. Yeah.
Yes.
So, as far as suffering goes, the human experience of suffering, suffering can also be, Christ definitely suffered. Is that to say that God suffers as well? Christ and the Father and the Son are one. So the Father is suffering as well, and that through suffering someone could also come to know God and then know all the other aspects of God as well.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to mention that Reverend Bob Patterson here is going to be is going to be doing the 4th week of the Spirituality Institute precisely on that. Now, it is true to say that the person of God, as Jesus Christ, did suffer. And as you say, since the three persons are one being, you could also say that all three persons suffered. Now, they didn't need to. Right? It wasn't one of those things that had to happen to them, because God, as a transcendent being, is beyond all causes. But it's another one of those things that God did in his outreach to us. He didn't have to suffer, but he did because he loves us, and we suffer. We cause ourselves a great deal of suffering, and then other people cause us some suffering, and then other things that we couldn't attribute to people, like the termites that eat off the leg of your table. See, when the table falls on your knee, you would suffer. So there are all kinds of suffering from all kinds of causes. And what God did in his infinite love for us is to take on suffering which he didn't deserve to have, and to show us how to suffer through to God.
Remember what Augustine said about how Christ is the delight of my soul and how God intrigues us to draw us up to himself.
Yeah, how Christ is the delight of my soul, because Christ has loved me unto death. And greater love than this no one has, than that he would die for his beloved. So these are the ways that we remind ourselves of what Jesus did. And when we concentrate upon that, we open ourselves to the love of God, which is the delight of our soul. That's another one of the things that Erica was asking about. Do I pray that way? Yes. But I also discover that after praying about the love of God for a while, I am no longer able to pay much attention to that. So sometimes I pray about God's justice, and sometimes about His beauty, and sometimes about something else. The variety is the spice, even of the spiritual life. Okay?
Dr. Brian?
Yes.
I have a question. Why is it that that lesson that we learned that the ultimate love that we could give back to God would be to die for God? That martyrdom could lead, if you not want to take the shortcut, it could kind of lead one to not feeling like anything you ever do is enough unless you're willing to die for God. And not only that, but maybe give up your parents and your loved ones. And it's always about giving up and giving up and suffering and suffering. And being brought up, even though my parents were atheist Jews, they were cultural Jews, and certainly suffering is a big part of the Jewish culture, you know, and it's that, why does it have to be so sad, or why does it have to be so lacking in order, why do I have to give up so much to get to God? Doesn't God want me to feel abundant and rich and full?
Yes, and what you're expressing is a misinterpretation that comes to you, right? That comes to you from people who are concerned with suffering less. Now notice, as soon as I fix my attention upon suffering less, then I am not thinking about God. I'm not thinking about God as He makes Himself accessible to us in Jesus Christ. And therefore I am rejecting the outreach of God. So I manage to make myself suffer some more. Okay? And my attempt to avoid suffering causes more suffering, and I can get into a downward spiral here. You know, when you have a sink full of water and you pull the plug on it and it starts gurgling and then it gets down the tube, you know. And this kind of stuff can happen when we get into that kind of counterproductive activity. And there are just loads of people busy doing that at any time, at any place. But you don't have to do that. What you want to think of is that I want to give something because of what I have received. I want to consider my life and the roses and whatever else is around me, and even the termites, as some kind of gift from God. I've got to figure out how it is a gift and how I can make use of this gift and how I can be really happy about the termites eating off my table leg. But if I look at it that way, then I am in danger of getting it right. It just could turn out that I would get this whole thing properly understood, and then I begin to deal with it in the proper way. And this is what we need to do. This is what saints help us with. Mother Teresa, for example. When she gave and gave and gave, right, it was because she was receiving and receiving and receiving. If your hand is full of stuff, you can't take any more. So when you begin to do this in a practical way, you discover that the giving enables the receiving. And by emptying your hand, you now make it possible for God to put a gift